Purposely. Your life, God's purpose. Listen at purposely.com.
Pornography is really an intimacy disorder. It's not a sex disorder. It's an intimacy disorder where someone is usually using pornography to cope and get a dopamine hit because they're struggling in one area or another.
I'm Julie Lyles Carr, and you're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. Get ready for some great inspiration for the life you're living, the kids you're raising, the marriage that you're nurturing, and the faith walk you're walking, right here on the AllMomDoes podcast. Hey friend, I'm Julie Lyles Carr. You're listening to the AllMomDoes podcast, part of the Purposely Podcast Network. We are going to be talking about a subject today that can be a little sensitive. So if you've got some little ones in the car and you want to maybe put on those headphones or maybe put the headphones on and go for a walk, we want you to be able to do that. So this is your little warning to go ahead and do that. Today on the show, I have Jenn Howie. She is a therapist, counselor, does all kinds of great work with women and with guys and marriages alongside her husband. Jenn, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I always chuckle a little bit on the inside when someone introduces me with a disclaimer. Jenn Howie's coming. Put on your headphones, everybody. Yeah. Do you have that friend where you never put them on speaker, or the moment you put them on speaker, you're like, "Hi, so and so, you're on speaker." Yeah, just to kind of give them a heads up.
Yeah,
that's
exactly
what I feel like is happening here today.
You know, maybe some of us should actually come with that disclaimer, just like a car loan or a medication. Just here's all the things you need to know ahead of time. Just yeah. So
Jenn Howie keeps it real, and watch out.
Yeah, Jenn Howie with the disclaimer. So
that's funny.
All right, Jenn, let's not keep the listener in suspense. Why don't you tell us where you are in the world, husband, kids, and your very specialized lane of work that you do?
Sounds great. I live in the Pacific Northwest. I am in Oregon. I live in a town called Bend, which is
beautiful.
Yeah. It's kind of known. It's known for how well it likes dogs.
Yeah.
And so Bend is a wonderful place to live. I live here. We have 5 adult children. They range from 25 to 30. And we are a blended family. We both are in second marriages. And I consider those his children, my children as well, even though we are in a second marriage. But both of us have a story that is rooted in sexual addiction. In the sense of my first spouse is now in prison due to sex crimes that he had committed about, just a little over 18, 19 years ago. And then I married my current husband, who ended up having a less severe form of addiction when it comes to this issue. So I have been working in the field really since that point. And we've raised 5 kids through all of this. And now my husband, Dan, and I are just committed to a healing process. That's why our website, Healing with the Howies, is an ING on purpose, because we both believe that healing is a process, and we continue to grow in relationship to God, to ourselves, and to each other. So that's kind of me in a nutshell, and us.
And you.
And us, yeah.
I am so thrilled to have you on the show, because I think this is something that I think we're doing a little bit better job, particularly in our faith circles, discussing some of the challenges of these type of issues, but we're still kind of working our way up there, right? Like really getting specific and clear about what a lot of marriages are going through. Now, Jenn, before we started recording, one thing that we talked about was, let's define betrayal in marriage. This is an area that you and Dan do a lot of work when it comes to betrayal in marriage, whether that comes from sexual addiction, whether it comes from pornography use, various things. How do you and Dan today look at what betrayal is? Can you give us sort of the confines of how you define that within your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So technically, betrayal is the act of deliberate disloyalty. Technically. Mm-hmm. And betrayal, like trauma, isn't always something that happens outside of us. A lot of times it's what happens inside of us as a result of what happens outside of us. So when I had first entered my healing process several years ago, my husband had sex crimes, and then my second husband had affairs and hookups and several other disloyalties. And I remember entering a group of women, and I often felt like, well, my betrayal is more than theirs because their husband's just looking at pornography, or their husband is, can I say masturbation on this on this podcast?
We'll go on and say it. We'll see what the producer wants to do with it. We'll go ahead.
Yeah. So, so betrayal, is often what happens to us as a result of what happens inside of us as a result of what happens to us. So, for that reason, it can be loosely defined because it can be based off of our past experiences. Our limbic system in our brain records experiences. And anytime that that's touched in on in any scenario where we are facing abandonment or disloyalty, dishonesty, lying, hiding, all of those kinds of things, it can trigger something inside of us. So as much as I'd love to give you a define or a definite definition, which we kind of did with a deliberate disloyalty, it's more about what we're experiencing internally as a result and how that relates to our interconnectedness with ourselves, with our spouse, with our children, with God, and those around us. So it's a little bit more intricate. If you are you familiar with APSATs? They're an organization that works with the partners of sexual addicted persons, and they talk about betrayal being how much it messes with your past, your present, and your future, because it isn't just a present moment thing that you're experiencing. It's called a multi-dimensional model, if you will, because it changes the way you view your past. And when we're in a relationship with anyone, whether it be our spouse or our children or our friends, there's an element of co-regulation that takes place. And while there's a lot of self-regulation that we work on with ourselves, the co-regulation piece just happens naturally because of that interconnectedness and relationship. So when betrayal comes in, when lying comes in, when deceit comes in, when withholding comes in, it messes with all of those relationships in one way or another. So for that reason, it's complex. Betrayal is complex. It's individual. It's subjective. And so we try not to get too caught up on the word itself and dive right into what the person is experiencing as an individual.
I appreciate you fleshing that out for us because oftentimes, particularly in our faith circles, we make sexual betrayal sort of the end all be all, and we allow that to be the definition of betrayal. Mm-hmm. But what I hear you saying is a spouse who's been withholding information about their social life or finances,
yes,
or different things that they may be going and doing apart from you, or friendships that they've been maintaining, even if those aren't friendships that are of a sexual nature, even if those aren't friendships with someone of the opposite sex, just anything in which you were the last person to be informed will be recorded by your nervous system as a betrayal. Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought up financial betrayal because that's a huge piece of betrayal as well. And intimacy is really the definition of being fully known, being fully vulnerable, fully seen. And betrayal comes and can enter into the relationship with any form of intimacy. So anytime that there is a lack of transparency, anytime that there is a lack of vulnerability, even, which is also, depends on who you're talking to. I'm very easy at being vulnerable. My husband is not. I can't tell you how many times we've had conversations where he's like, well, that was vulnerable. I'm like, no, it wasn't. That was just like low bar. And he's like, no, that was vulnerable for me. And then I have to really consider that was vulnerable for him,
Right.
But anytime that there's a lack of willingness to consider the other person's perspective and how our actions or their actions may affect each other, we really have to consider what that does to the other person. So I try not to get too caught up, you're right, on that word, because there's a lot more that goes into it and unpacking it and moving through it.
Absolutely. So within that, give us a snapshot of where you see marriages are today within this topic, within how things are happening. You were telling me that Barna has actually pulled some new statistics, has done some new research because, we rely on things from, 10 years ago, but boy, the landscape continues to change, Jen. I mean, with technology, with
Yeah.
different ways in which people's definitions of things shift and change and all of that, it can really be challenging to get an accurate read on where we are today. So, what are you seeing when it comes to some of the latest research, some of the latest surveys, all of that?
Barna is currently looking at the new rates of divorce. They're partnering actually with Pure Desire Ministries to go over how is our pornified world really starting to affect these numbers in marriages when it comes to pornography use, when it comes to divorce, when it comes to betrayal. So those numbers are due to be out, I think, maybe even this fall, which we're really heading into right now. So. But at this point, we know that at least 70% of men in the church struggle with some form of pornography. And that's a lot. And that includes our pastors as well. And I'm not here to share that statistic to scare anybody, but I do want to be realistic at how infiltrated this issue is into our marriages. So with that, I would say 84% of Christians are struggling in one way or another in this area of intimacy, emotional, relational, and sexual intimacy with their spouse. So there's a lot of statistics that will be coming out, and so if you want to check that out, Pure Desire will have some information on that as well as Barna. You can go to their websites and check that out as well. That being said, I think we don't have to even look at the statistics to really understand how this is affecting our families. And it's an issue that we can't ignore, especially with AI coming along and the fact that we can reach and access pornography in any way or another. We just can't hand our phones over to our kids or our iPads over to really anything. Can't even have your child watch YouTube anymore without really having a close eye on predators and how they show up. So again, I don't say that to scare anybody. I say that to just be realistic and to put on the armor and move forward in ways that are going to protect our marriages and our relationships with our family as well.
I am fascinated by the conversations I've had specific to porn, because you brought up pornography. The variety of opinions that I hear, both in faith circles and outside of faith circles. I've had people tell me straight up, I don't think porn is cheating. I don't think it's the same thing. I've had people who have discovered their spouses were using pornography and have been so hurt by that. I've had other people who've said, yeah, I know my spouse is using that, but we talked about it and whatever, it's fine. I know about it. It is not a deliberate disloyalty, if you will, in their mind. Now, you and I know all the information about what it does to our brains and all the statistics surrounding it and all of that. I am not in any way saying that it's net neutral. I'm saying the variety of opinions surrounding the use of pornography in marriage are pretty fascinating to me. I have had a hard time going, wait, what? You think what?
Yeah.
So what are you seeing? What are you and your husband seeing in your practice surrounding this to help give us a better snapshot of this thing that we have now that is so central in many ways to some of the marriage issues, relationships that we're seeing? How do you guys look at that world? How do you containerize that, if you will, for the people that you're helping, the people you're speaking to?
Yeah, great question. A lot of people actually define pornography different as well. So I know several people who will walk past Victoria's Secret and a woman or a person might be upset that pornography is out in the open, and another person will walk past it and invite her husband into that same place and say, hey, I need to go, pick up some new items. I need to go in there and pick things out. Do you want to come in? So people's definition of pornography really changes as well. So when we're working with couples, we really have to really start to get down to these definitions. What is cheating to you? What is pornography to you? What is loyalty? What is lying? And you think it would be common sense, but the reality is we all have a narrative and we all have some running definition in our mind as to what that is. So the first thing we do when we work with couples is really, okay, what is your definition of? Because if you guys aren't on the same page as to what that definition is, then we really have to pump the brakes and move towards a commonality so that we can have a common language moving forward. So typically what we will do is we always define to the person that has the bigger boundaries. So, and this is because pornography is really an intimacy disorder. It's not a sex disorder. It's an intimacy disorder where someone is usually using pornography to cope and get a dopamine hit because they're struggling in one area or another. And that obviously requires talking through it. So the first thing we do is we define. We define what is pornography, what is lying, what is cheating. Lying by omission. Some couples are like, cool, I don't want to know everything. And other couples are like, I want to know everything. So until we get that definition down, we can't really move forward. After that is defined, then we start to look at, okay, what areas am I withholding from my spouse? My question would be for any spouse that is engaging in pornography, why are you doing this? If we know that thoughts and beliefs create emotions that drive behavior, there's a behavior that's taking place. What is the emotion? What is the thought? What is the belief that is causing you to go towards this instead of towards your spouse? And so there's a lot to break down when it comes to that, but without a clear definition, having a couple on the same page first, there's really no place to go from there, because we know that what's damaging the relationship is not just a lack of transparency, but the lack of moving toward a common goal. When you got married, there's no way that any of us had a common goal of, okay, he'll just go do his thing and I'll just go do mine. Nobody has that goal in mind when they get married. I guess maybe somebody out there does, but it's not healthy. The point of marriage is to bring each other together and move towards things together. And so that includes every area of intimacy, physical and emotional.
Thank you to our sponsor, George Fox University. George Fox University is unique. It is a Christ-centered, student-focused university where your student is going to be appreciated for the individual they are, the learning style, and the goals that they have, while also keeping focus on their relationship with Christ. I want you to go check it out at georgefox.edu. Again, that's georgefox.edu. Thanks so much for being our sponsor, George Fox. I really appreciate this filter through which we're looking at, for example, porn use, which is that it's an intimacy disorder. And it feels like to me that can be applied in other areas where we see couples struggle, with this disloyalty, whether that is getting on social media accounts and interacting with the old boyfriend from high school, to, whatever that looks like. There are lots of ways in which it can be the canary in the coal mine saying, hey, there's an intimacy disorder happening here at some level, even if it doesn't go to some technical threshold that we traditionally look at as betrayal. That's a really, really powerful way of looking at that. I thank you for bringing that into our purview in terms of a way of looking at some of this. And within the context of different behaviors and things that happen that create betrayal, one thing that's interesting to me, Jen, is certainly when my friends and I were all first getting married, when we were coming out of college and heading into our careers and getting married, the narrative just practically always was, oh, if a guy ever cheated on me, boom, out. That would be the end of that. I know guys who definitely have found that, that same attitude toward their spouse. Oh, if I ever found out she was cheating on me, she would be gone. That would be over. The thing that I'm finding interesting today is a lot of us have moved into further decades of marriage, kids, extended families, having homes together, investments, just life together. I'm seeing, I think, more and more couples choosing to walk through and really try to repair marriage after a significant betrayal. And it's interesting to me that that idealism of, oh, it would be over. Boy, you pack more people into it, and it's just not between the couple anymore. It's families and business and all kinds of things. What are you seeing on your side? Because I know that there definitely would have been a time where I thought, put a marriage back together, betrayal recovery. What are you talking about? Like, that abruption is so significant. Is that even possible? So tell me about your experience in watching couples being willing to do that, and what it takes and why they choose to stay together.
Girl, how much time do you have today? There's so much behind that, because people are generally in one camp or the other.
Right.
It's either I'm out of here. A lot of people say, you don't deserve this, girl. Go, God has someone else for you. There's more for you in life. And then there's these other people that are like, no, God hates divorce. You got to stay. And then people sit in one camp or another. And what I've really found in the betrayal world is this vacillation between each. I'm in, I'm out. And for many of us, it's a day in, day out decision to stay or to go, at least in your head and in your heart. And there's this constant wrestling, which is why it makes it so exhausting, which is why it makes it difficult to remember things like, okay, I just got the popcorn maker out. I don't remember where it goes back. Darn it. Or when you, or you go to, you turn on the water faucet in your bathroom with the intention of flushing the toilet, like your brain just goes offline.
Right.
So, and that's how our minds work during betrayal, right? That prefrontal cortex, we don't have access to it. We can't think straight. So there tends to be this, you vacillate between being in that world of, I deserve more. I'm going to go get, healthier spouse, for some people, and others, I'm going to show God's glory. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But if you notice, all those statements started with I. Mm-hmm. And there is most definitely a we in this. And so first of all, you have to have a spouse who's willing to put in the work. He can have sincerity. He can have capability. Does he have durability? Does he have sustainability? And that's only, you only know what that is with some time that goes past. So you really have to slow down. This process is very slow. I'm with you. I always said, when I was in my 20s, I always said I would never be with anyone who cheated on me, ever. And as a woman whose first marriage didn't work out, as a woman who continues to work on her second marriage, there is a vast difference between a man who works on his stuff and a man who doesn't. And for this context, I'm saying man because of my experience. I know full well that there are plenty of marriages where the roles are reversed, where the woman has cheated and the man has been betrayed. So I want to hold space for that. But what do we do? How do we know which camp we're in? The reality is you're probably going to vacillate between the both, because you have a lot of loud voices telling you one way or another. If you go to a pastor, they have a tendency to tell you one thing, right? So how do we decide? How do we decide which one we're going to do or which way we're going to go? Well, that's where you get into counseling. So the question then becomes, how do I know? How do I know if I should stay or I should go? Now, it greatly depends on if that other person is in. Do you feel safe? Do you feel heard? Do you feel seen? Are you being blamed? These are questions that you really need to ask yourself. A great book, it's called Safe People. I don't know if you've heard of it. I think Cloud, is it Townsend and Cloud? But they have a great list that you can refer to as to, am I in a safe relationship? So you need to determine, am I in a safe relationship? How much capacity do you have to even dive into this subject, right? You and I, Julie, we both have a lot of children. We have a handful of children, or in your case, more. That has a profound effect.
Right.
There can be financial reasons why we feel like we can't go, right? There can be several reasons why we might hold on to staying. And no matter what, you're at risk for people having an opinion on whether or not you should stay or go. So be prepared for that. Get with a certified sex addiction therapist. Get with an APSATS trained therapist. There's many people who really should have some clinical testing done when it comes to maybe some personality disorders, because if there is a personality disorder in effect here, then that changes the form of treatment that we take. So there's a lot of varying factors, but no matter what, no matter whether you decide to stay or go, it's important to have what we call a therapeutic disclosure. And that is where the spouse gets with a counselor and they break down their full sexual history. And when I say full sexual history, I mean the whole thing, from their very first exposure to pornography to where they are today and the things that are acting out that has taken place in the marriage. And then the spouse will then meet with another coach or counselor to go through an impact letter. Oftentimes, now don't freak out, listeners, but oftentimes we will follow that up with a polygraph to know whether or not am I getting true information. Because how can you truly make an informed decision if you do not have all the information? If you're making a decision to stay or go, it has to be based off of all of the information.
Right, the total picture. Yeah.
Right. There's dignity of choice that is at play here. So I had told my husband back years and years and years ago, I said that the most unkind thing you've ever done was to marry me under false pretenses without giving me all the information. I said, but the kindest thing you've done was here today, disclosing everything. Mm-hmm. Because without that disclosure, I don't have any autonomy. I can't make decisions for myself if I don't know what I'm making a decision. But what am I leaving? What am I staying for? So that is the very first step, is getting with a certified sex addiction therapist or a pastoral sex addiction professional of some sort, and really getting an idea of let's get a full disclosure and then decide where to go from here. But gosh, I admire any woman who can stay, and I truly admire any woman that can go, because both are hard decisions to make, and nobody else can make that decision for you. And the thing is that, God's with us in each of the decisions that we make, right?
Right.
So whether you decide to stay or whether you decide to go, bring him along, and he's going to guide you and lead you through that.
Let me ask you this, because we're looking at it primarily, to this point, we've been looking at it from the perspective of someone who discovers that there has been this deliberate disloyalty. Let's flip that a little bit. Let's say we have a listener who realizes that there's been a deliberate disloyalty about finances, or being in contact with an old flame, or pornography, or maybe even an affair or a one-night thing that happened out of town during work. Let's say that listener is saying, okay, I'm feeling some conviction of the Holy Spirit. I need to sit down and talk to my spouse about what's happened. Because to your point, I think that the betrayal feels even worse for people when they stumble upon it.
Ooh.
As the partner. When the partner discovers the spend for the flowers, or that that person, their partner wasn't where they said they were last weekend, or whatever. So if we have someone listening who's thinking, I have some stuff I need to fess up to, what is the route that creates, there's going to be damage, but that creates less shrapnel, if you will, as this truth bomb goes off?
Wow. Yeah. There's something that's called drip disclosure. And they have found with spouses who continually drip disclose, a little bit here, a little bit there, and not all of the truth, they have found that the betrayed spouse ends up having a post-traumatic stress index of a rape victim.
Wow.
I cannot tell you enough how important it is to not do a drip disclosure. And I understand why an addict might. A lot of times they feel like, well, I'm just protecting my spouse. I'll just tell them a little bit. I've got everything under control. There's all these justifications that go into drip disclosures. And then they'll say, well, she wanted to know a little bit more, so I told her a little bit more. No, what she wants to know is everything. And that's why we go to the therapeutic disclosure with great intentionality, because drip disclosures is constantly, let's just say you give a disclosure and your spouse starts bleeding out. They start to feel relatively like, okay, they're gonna survive this scenario. And so there's this sort of bandage that you've put over it, even though she's still bleeding. When you do a drip disclosure, you are constantly ripping off that bandage, and the bleeding becomes more and more and more. And so we have to really consider the emotional and psychological damage that drip disclosures do. So if you are feeling convicted, like, I really need to share these things with my spouse, I highly recommend that you get in touch with a few different organizations. I think APSATS would be one, Pure Desire would be another, Pure Life Alliance, Daring Ventures with Jake Porter. Any of these types of organizations are going to help walk someone who's struggling with this on how to present it to their spouse. So it isn't to be done lightly, and your spouse does deserve to know everything. But keep in mind, your version of everything and her version of everything can look very, very different. So this is where we start to get in conversations like, how much do you want to know? You'd be surprised at how much spouses want to know. And also you'll hear time and time again, it wasn't what he did. It was the lying. It was the deception. It was the withholding. Those are the things that wreak havoc. If you look back, what happened in the garden? The deception is what became root, right?
Right.
And so that is the same thing takes place in our marriage. The same thing takes place in our hearts. When deception is the root of confession, and there's continued deception, then we are going to stay stuck. And so we really need to consider, listener, if you are wanting to tell your spouse something, really need to consider having some direction on how to do that. You want to make sure the spouse has support, putting them in a position where they're going to have support after this confession has taken place.
Those are all great resources and ways to think about it. And that phrase of this drip disclosure, that makes so much sense, Jenn, into why that would create even more hurt and would create even more triggering events moving forward. So I really thank you for sharing that particular phrase. It's really a fascinating perspective on how to think about ways to navigate forward in relationship where there has been this breach of trust. Jenn, there's an upcoming event that you have. If the listener is listening prior to October 5th of 2024, there's an event coming up that is the Hope Rising Conference. We connected through a friend of mine who's been on the show before. Her name is Lynn Cherry, and this is an event that she helps put on. This live stream is going to be helping men and women who have experienced betrayal. This one is for both, not just women. This is for men and women who've experienced betrayal. And what do you hope to accomplish through that live stream? What is the experience like when you do this type of event?
Well, first of all, the event is absolutely fantastic. They are covering every area of recovering from betrayal. So it's through a fair recovery. And so they have several speakers on there that will really be covering each and every topic. The topic I'm specifically speaking on is essentially the interconnectedness of relationships and identity, recovering your identity after betrayal. And so there will be other people speaking on other subjects as well. So I highly recommend that anyone get over there and take a look at that as they're looking to gain more information, more knowledge, and some support and some valuable tools on how to engage in their own healing process and coming out of this murky, dark place that many of us have been in or know people who have.
Lynn, we've just got to have you back on again. I'm so thankful Lynn connected us. Jenn, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'd love to have you back on soon to talk about that place of recovering your self-identity and your understanding of self in the wake of something like this. Where can a listener go to find out more about you and about your husband and the work that you do?
Yeah, we are Healing with the Howies, so healingwiththehowies.com, and that is where you will find a little bit of information on us. It's really our heart's desire to connect people with the right resources for them, so that anytime anyone comes into our Zoom session and we do an intake, our goal is to really get them the help that they need. So whether it be with us or with any other organization, our consultations are predominantly to do that, get people connected where they need connections. So finding the right fit for them is really our heart. So that's where you can find us, and that's really where we start.
Well, Jenn, again, thank you so much for being on. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Julie.
All right, listener, you know where to go. Go to the show notes that Rebecca puts together. You'll find their connection and links for where you can go and find Jenn, the work that she's doing. Also, be sure and check out that Hope Rising conference that's going to be on October 5th, 2024. And we'll make sure that we've got the link in the show notes for you there. Go to AllMomDoes.com. That's where you find lots of great stuff and community for women in the same seasons of life that you're in. I love to connect with you too on Instagram primarily. You just come right on over. I would love to hear from you, hear about topics that you want to know more about. You just feel free to chat with me in my DMs, and I will see you next time on the AllMomDoes podcast.